Welcome to Flyp Academy, and our general plot summary video on Romeo and Juliet. In this video we will be covering what happens in the play, act by act, and scene by scene. This is very important for achieving the highest grade in your exam, as you need to have knowledge at your fingertips about what happens across the whole play to give a well-rounded answer. We will now delve into the general plot summary, which should make you enthusiastic about the most famous love story of all time. A prologue was a common practice at the beginning of a play to summarize the events and generate tension as a dramatic element. It depicts the story of two star-crossed lovers who come from opposing families and have an ancient grudge. The viewer learns that in order for the children from the two families to be together, they must end up taking their own lives. It's a Sunday, and the streets of Verona are crowded. Two Capulet servants, Samson and Gregory, are tormenting one another and express how much they despise a rival family, the Montagues. A quarrel breaks out between Abraham and Balthasar of the Montagacenta. Benvolio attempts to intervene, but Tybalt refuses to aid him, and the brawl escalates into a riot, which is ultimately broken up by the town guards. The prince threatens to kill anyone who violates the calm once more. After the scene, Romeo arrives and informs his friend Benvolio that he does not want anything to do with violence. He also admits to being lovesick since the lady he has love for, Rosalind, refuses to know him. Paris pays a visit to Lord Capulet and asks to marry his daughter, Juliet. Lord Capulet urges Paris to wait 2 more years because she isn't yet 14 years old. However, Capulet invites Paris to their home for a masked ball, or celebration. When Benvolio and Romeo learn about the party, Benvolio pushes Romeo to attend so he may forget about Rosalind. Lady Capulet, Juliet, and the nurse converse about marriage. The nurse recalls her extended connection with Juliet, beginning with being her wet nurse as a newborn and continuing to the present day. Here, she makes some crude sexual jokes. Lady Capulet questions Juliet about marriage because she is worried of her daughter becoming an old maid because she was already married with children when Juliet was Juliet's age. While Juliet is nonchalant of Paris's marriage proposal, she accepts to go along with it. The scene is concluded by Peter the servant informing them that the guests are on their way to the party. It's now Sunday evening, and numerous partygoers, including Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio, have gathered outside Capulet's mansion. Mercutio's light-hearted and smart banter contrasts with Romeo's somber mood induced by a dream about death he has had. However, it's clear Mercutio has a dark side as well. The visitors arrive, followed by lots of dancing and music, as preparations for Capulet's celebration are prepared. Romeo sees Juliet for the first time from afar and is taken aback by her beauty. Despite his disguise, Romeo is discovered by Tybalt, a Capulet, who wants to murder Romeo for coming in uninvited, but Lord Capulet forbids him since it would raise a commotion and disrupt the festivities. Tybalt is enraged by this and vows vengeance on Romeo. Romeo walks up to Juliet. They converse before kissing. To Romeo's chagrin, Nurse interrupts and informs him that Juliet is a Capulet. Eventually, Juliet discovers that Romeo is a Montague, and she responds similarly. Romeo wanders away from the gathering and into the Capulets' orchard, where he wishes to remain with the Capulets. Benvolio and Mercutio come and use double entendres to entice Romeo out of his hiding place. They taunt Rosalind, believing she is still Romeo's object of passion and that he would be enraged enough to emerge from his hiding spot and confront them. Eventually they depart because they realize he will not come out and expose himself. This is possibly the most famous moment in English theatrical history, known as the balcony scene. Romeo is in the orchard when he notices Juliet on her balcony. Juliet, unaware that Romeo is present, speaks passionately of him while lamenting the fact that he is a Montague. Romeo alerts her to his presence. Juliet is taken aback, but the two of them strike into a passionate discussion. They rush to plan marrying after being interrupted again by the nurse. Romeo goes to meet his companion, Friar Lawrence, early on Monday morning. When Lawrence last met Romeo, he was lovesick for Rosalind, and Lawrence is delighted to see the improvement in him until he finds Romeo wants to marry Juliet, and that she is the one who brought about the transformation in him. Friar Lawrence is first skeptical of this proposal, but later agrees to marry Romeo and Juliet in the belief that the union would bring peace to the warring families. This is a really cheerful scene, and it is the only one in the play where we see Romeo truly having fun with his pals. Mercutio taunts Benvolio and Romeo, and they have a quick-fire repartee. Romeo's joy is wrongly attributed to his love for Rosaline by Benvolio and Mercutio. When the nurse arrives looking for Romeo, Mercutio viciously taunts her for her looks, inciting her rage. When Romeo is alone with the nurse, she warns him not to fool with Juliet. Romeo tells the nurse to inform Juliet he will have ropes delivered to her so that she can escape from her room. The nurse then claims she has to go to confession in the afternoon so the friar may marry them. The scene opens with Juliet eagerly awaiting the nurse's return and the news of Romeo. Juliet is looking forward to hearing the news she brings, and she is subsequently told of the hidden plan for her to marry Romeo. In this scene, the nurse recognizes Romeo's gentility, at the same time as his innocence and brashness, and she offers her true opinion to Juliet, regardless of the Capulet-Montague family feud. The scene opens with Juliet eagerly awaiting the nurse's return and the news of Romeo. Juliet is looking forward to hearing the news she brings, and she is subsequently told of the hidden plan for her to marry Romeo. In this scene, the nurse recognizes Romeo's gentility, at the same time as his innocence and brashness, and she offers her true opinion to Juliet, regardless of the Capulet-Montague family feud. This is the pivotal moment in the play and can be considered the climax of the drama. After the wedding, the audience and Romeo are on an emotional high, but it all comes tumbling down in this scene even though it's barely 1 hour after the wedding. On the streets of Verona, Benvolio and Mercutio converse. Benvolio is attempting to persuade Mercutio to go inside since it is really hot outside and he fears a brawl if they come across the Capulets. Mercutio, as is customary, rejects this idea and teases Benvolio. Tybalt enters, and he and Mercutio have a furious argument which ends in Tybalt killing Mercutio, even though Romeo tries to get between them to keep the peace. Romeo then murders Tybalt in an act of revenge because he is deeply bereaved and angry at the loss of his friend. The prince banishes Romeo from Verona as punishment. Juliet has no idea what has happened and waits at home anticipating her wedding night with Romeo. The nurse walks in, weeping and screaming Romeo's name and that someone has died. Juliet believes it is Romeo, but quickly realizes it is Tybalt and that Romeo murdered him. She criticizes Romeo at first, then defends him to the nurse. The nurse agrees to find Romeo and invites him to wish Juliet goodbye. We return to Friar Lawrence's cell, where Romeo is devastated by the news of his forced exile. Lawrence attempts to persuade Romeo to see reason, but he cannot. The nurse comes and informs Romeo that Juliet is continually weeping. Romeo gets a knife and offers to kill himself to remove the punishment on his name since he feels that expulsion from Verona is worse than death. Friar Lawrence stops him and becomes annoyed. He then devises a scheme to save the two lovers. Friar Lawrence instructs Romeo to meet Juliet as planned, but warns him to leave Verona before daybreak and travel to neighboring Mantua. This is a short scene in which the Capulets and Paris discuss Juliet's destiny. They are mourning Tybalt's death, and Juliet is especially sorrowful for Romeo, unknown to her family, and also Tybalt. Paris pursues Juliet through Lord Capulet, and they agree that the prospect of her marrying Paris will cheer her up and improve her disposition. This scene takes place in Juliet's bedroom extremely early on Tuesday morning. Romeo and Juliet had spent the night together and neither wants to split, despite the fact that they recognize Romeo must leave or face death if he is arrested. Thus Romeo departs. Lady Capulet comes, informing Juliet that she would marry Paris on Thursday. As Juliet refuses, Lord Capulet becomes enraged and threatens her. Juliet seeks advice from the nurse, who advises her to marry Paris because Romeo has been exiled indefinitely. Juliet, recognizing she has nowhere else to turn, intends to seek assistance from Friar Lawrence. When Juliet arrives, Paris is with Friar Lawrence, attempting to arrange his marriage to Juliet. Paris departs, and Juliet threatens to kill herself if Lawrence is unable to save her and Romeo. He devises a strategy: she should return home and apologize to her father before marrying Paris. Lawrence gives Juliet a concoction that renders her comatose and mimics the symptoms of death for 42 hours. After that, she will be carried to the Capulet tomb and laid to rest. Meanwhile, the friar will send a note to Romeo, instructing him to return from Mantua discreetly and take Juliet away soon as she awakens. It is Tuesday afternoon, and the Capulets are getting ready for the wedding. Juliet steps inside and apologizes to her father about her refusal. Capulet chooses to shift the wedding day ahead to Wednesday, which is the very next day. The Capulets start joyously preparing for the celebrations. Juliet is in her bedroom with the nurse and her mother, but she convinces them to leave since it is crucial for her plan to succeed. Juliet is concerned about the possible implications of drinking the potion, such as getting poisoned, being stuck in the tomb, or going insane and committing suicide. But the sight of Tybalt's ghost persuades her, and she eventually manages to drink it. The Capulet household are making the perfect arrangements for the upcoming marriage of Juliet and Paris. Lord Capulet is particularly excited about this prospect, and he tells Nurse to go and wake Juliet by the end. The Capulet household are making the perfect arrangements for the upcoming marriage of Juliet and Paris. Lord Capulet is particularly excited about this prospect, and he tells Nurse to go and wake Juliet by the end. The scene shifts to Romeo in exile in Mantua. Balthasar, his servant, has arrived on horseback to notify him that Juliet has died and her body has been deposited in the Capulet family tomb. Romeo asks Balthasar if he has a message from the friar, but he does not, so Romeo intends to go to Juliet in Verona. He intends to commit suicide and forever lie with her in the vault, so he makes a pit stop along the route and buys some extremely potent poison with which to end his life. Friar Lawrence had already dispatched Friar John to deliver a letter to Romeo in Mantua. Friar John, on the other hand, returns, stating that he was unable to do so. The city's health authorities wouldn't even let him leave Verona since he was suspected of harboring an infection. Lawrence immediately requests Friar John to procure him a crowbar, anticipating the possibly fatal repercussions. Juliet is about to awaken, and the friar plans to break into the grave to be with her. He intends to hold her in his cell until he can notify Romeo of what has transpired. He is ignorant of the fact that Romeo is on his way and has already learned of Juliet's death. Paris has paid his respects at Juliet's grave. Romeo approaches the grave as well, and Paris feels Romeo has come to do something heinous against the Capulets since he knows nothing about their bond of love. Paris challenges Romeo, who attempts to advise him not to. When Paris refuses this advice, the two fight and Paris is slain. Romeo, unaware that Juliet will soon awaken, is amazed by how her cheeks and lips have retained their color. Overcome by sadness, he consumes the poison, kisses Juliet goodbye, and dies. When Friar Lawrence enters the grave, Juliet awakens. Some outside noise indicates that they are about to be disturbed, most likely by the watch. Friar Lawrence flees as he is afraid of being arrested. Juliet remains, and as she realizes Romeo has poisoned himself, she tries to do the same, but there isn't a drop left. She kisses Romeo before stabbing herself with his dagger. The prince and the guard, as well as Lord and Lady Capulet and Lord Montague, arrive. Lady Montague died earlier that night, devastated over Romeo's banishment. The watch apprehends Friar Lawrence and Balthasar. Friar Lawrence eventually tells the prince the entire tale, and the prince believes him, especially because he is reinforced by a letter written by Romeo and handed to the prince by Balthasar. The prince, who is both pained and outraged, criticizes the hostility between the two families. Lord Capulet and Lord Montague join hands and promise to erect golden statues of Romeo and Juliet to remind the people of Verona of the power of pure love and the importance of living peacefully. This concludes our video on the general plot summary of Romeo and Juliet. In the following videos we will be doing character study analysis, looking at themes and motifs, and essay plans for these topics.